Hey everybody, how's it going? David Wood here, known as David Wood FX on YouTube. And welcome to another exciting graphic design tutorial. As you could probably tell though by that new intro, there are some changes to this channel. So a couple of quick announcements before we get going with the tutorial. I recently started a website known as theblendmode.com. And this is going to be where all of my future tutorials are uploaded. So my Blogspot account will still be used for written tutorials, but all the video tutorials will be put up here, and I'm going to be focusing on making them as professional as possible. Really, the point of the site is going to be about how to use Gimp in a professional setting so that you could compete against Photoshop and other similar programs. The website is going to have Gimp, Photoshop, and After Effects tutorials for now. In the future, I would like to expand that to other freeware programs such as Blender or Paint.net, even Inkscape, because a lot of people use those programs and they get laughed at whenever they tell somebody that they use them. That's been my experience. I have shown people really cool stuff that I have made with Gimp, and then they ask me what I made it in, and then they laugh because it's not an expensive program like Photoshop. So the point of the site is really going to be about web development and graphic design for websites and stuff like that. And if you have tutorials that you would like to post, then please send me an email at theblendmode@gmail.com and let me know, and we'll see what we can do. It has to be a high quality project, of course, because, as I said, we want this to be as professional as Photoshop can be. The second announcement is I have a Fiverr account now. So if you have graphic design projects that you can't get a hand on, then send it to me on Fiverr, and I will be more than happy to help you out. Currently I have a gig up for add special effects to your photos for $5, and I think you guys will really like that. And I'm going to have some other gigs up by the time that you guys probably go there. But in the meantime, you can send me stuff through that. Yeah, so those are my two really cool announcements. So theblendmode.com, go there and take a look at it and help me build this site up. It's going to be really, really cool once it's done. And also Fiverr.com, if you guys want some inexpensive design work done, then come see me over there. That is still going to be under David Wood FX. Both of those links will be in the description. So now on with the tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to be creating this text effect that I found recently. Really cool. It is a volcanic rock and lava effect. That is one example, and this is the other example. And I think you guys will really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and start getting that ready. There's a few things we're going to need first though. We are going to need a 3D extrusion plugin, which you can find on gimpscripts.com. There will be a link for this in the description. This is a really, really cool plugin that allows you to create some 3D depth. Really cool plugin, so be sure to download that and install it. And the other thing we're going to use is a font on dafont.com known as Know Your Product. This is a really cool kind of a graffiti stencil font, and this will look really cool once we add some 3D depth to it to make our rock effect. A couple more things that we're going to need is a couple of textures. And we are going to need a rock texture similar to this one. I found this on cgtextures.com. You can find your textures wherever you want, but we're going to use a rock texture like this, and then a cracked ground texture like this. So you're going to want to have both of those downloaded and ready to use. So let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. Now inside of Gimp, I've already gone ahead and made the background because that's not the important element in this tutorial. It's really the text effect, and just to save you guys some time. We're going to change our foreground color to white and choose our text tool. We're going to find the Know Your Product font. And then we can type. And I'm just going to use the same text that I used in the preview. So lava, and scale that up. There is a little bit of spacing issues with this font, so if we select between two of the letters, we can use the spacing options and bring them closer together, and then scale it up a little bit more. Then we'll go ahead and center our text. That looks really cool. And we're going to duplicate the text layer and turn off the top one. And on this middle one, we're going to create the 3D extrusion effect. So you're going to find it under Filters, Render, 3D extrusion. And this is a really cool plugin that allows you to extrude in a direction, or to grow a selection out, or to shrink a selection. And I encourage you guys to just play around with the settings and you will just love it. It's really cool. In the settings though, we want to change the extrusion type to shrink. We want to change the bump azimuth to 270. And there is a diagram on the 3D extrusion post that shows you how the direction works. And this is talking about the extrusion direction, but the bump azimuth is actually the lighting direction. And it works in the opposite of what this diagram shows. So in my case, I want the light to be coming from the bottom of the image as I've set it up. So we want, instead of having the azimuth at 90, which would be coming from the bottom, we want to set it to 270. So this is a handy little diagram you can look at in the future if you need to figure out the opposite direction that you want the light to come from. In the bump elevation, we're going to set that to 90. And in the bump depth, we're going to set that around 65. The ambient light, we also want to set that on 100. The other settings we can leave alone. If you want, you can go ahead and play with those. It's important to always try something new, but we're going to leave them alone for this particular effect. And the extrusion depth is going to be 10. That is good enough, and hit OK. And there you can see the effect. And now we have some 3D text, which looks pretty cool. There is light coming from the bottom. Very neat. So we can go ahead and take these two layers and merge them together into one. So now we just have one 3D layer. Next we want to lock the alpha channel and go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're just going to soften up the harsh edge on the text, because otherwise the rock is going to look very chiseled, and we don't want that. We just want a very soft edge. So for this picture, 2 pixels is going to work fine for that. And because we locked the alpha channel, it did not affect the outside border. That is still going to be sharp. But these corners here, where our texture is going to kind of wrap around it, it's going to look like the corner is actually a little rounded, which is what we're going for. Next we can go to Layer, Layer to Image Size, because we're not going to be moving this layer around. And we still have this extra text layer up here. Don't delete that, we're going to use that in the future. So just keep that hidden for now. And now what we want to do is to bring in our textures. So the first texture we're going to bring in is going to be that rock texture. So drag it in here on top of the other layers. And it's a pretty big texture. So we are going to scale it down and just roughly make it the size of the image. Make sure you have the chain locked so you scale it uniformly, because otherwise it will look very weird. And then what we're going to do is take our extrusion layer, right click on it and choose Alpha to Selection. Then we're going to go back to our texture layer, right click and choose Add a Layer Mask. So we are going to choose black for a full transparency and hit Add. So now we can't see the effect. But then making sure that our layer mask is selected over here, go to Edit, Fill with Foreground Color, which should be white. And this will fill the mask with white just where our text is. And we can go select None. And we're going to set this blend mode on Multiply. Now just on its own it looks pretty cool. This layer though, the rock texture is a little contrasted and I want to darken it up some. So we can go to Colors, Curves, something like that. That looks pretty good. Now our rock texture is a little flat. It doesn't have a whole lot of depth to it. So we're going to change that. So we'll go to Layer, Layer to Image Size, just to make sure that it's the same size as our extrusion layer. And then go to Filters, Map, Bump Map. And this is a really cool plugin for giving things a little bit of a 3D depth. So the first thing we're going to do is set this up very similar to our 3D extrusion. So the azimuth, we're going to set that at 270. And right away you can see that it gave it a little bit of a shadow on one side and then a highlight on the other side. And we can try and adjust the elevation and the depth if we want. I'm going to leave them the way they are. That looks really good, and hit OK. So now our text has just a little bit more 3D-ness to it. And it's still a little bright. Now what we'll bring in is our cracked ground effect, like this. Very cool effect. Drag that on top. And the first thing we'll do is colors, desaturate, colors, invert. And then we'll adjust this. We want to get rid of the grays and just leave the white cracks. So we'll use colors or levels, whichever one you want to use. And we'll just start adjusting this. Now we want to set the blend mode on screen, and then we can move this around till we find a section of cracks that we like and want to keep. So we'll do the same thing for a layer mask that we did for the rock texture. So right click on the extrusion, choose alpha to selection, go back to the cracked soil, right click and choose add layer mask. We want it to be black for full transparency, and then we want to fill the selection with white. So now we just have the cracks here on the rock texture, but they don't really match. They don't seem to have any kind of a depth for that. So what we'll do is select the rock texture again and go to make sure that our cracked layer is also the same size as our image. Go back to the rocks. So we'll bring up filters, bump map again. And in here we want to set the bump map to the cracked ground effect, and you can see it very faintly in here. And we'll take the depth and push that up. That looks pretty good. And we'll take the elevation and bring that down just a little bit, so we have just a tiny amount of that highlight on one side of the crack. Now again, because of the direction the light is coming from down here, we can leave the azimuth the same, or we can change it to 90. But there's also a handy button called invert the bump map, which will basically invert the azimuth for us, so we don't have to change the settings if we want to use that later. So that looks pretty good. Go ahead and hit OK. Now our rock texture has these really cool cracks going through it. Okay, so now we're ready to start making this look more like lava instead of white lines. So we can try setting the blend mode of this on dodge, and dodge is what worked best for me in my other examples. And we'll go into colors, curves, and just bump that up like this. And the cool thing about dodge is the fact that in darker areas of the image, dodge will be much darker, so it doesn't show up as much, which is handy because we want the side of the rock to be darker because of the way that the shadows work. So we can bump that up, and that looks pretty good. And then go to our red channel, push that up, and then take the blue channel, push that down, and you can see this really blew out the image like that. That's a little intense, but it will look good in the end. Actually, we can try setting this on screen, duplicate the layer, and set the bottom one, take the screen and just lower it a little bit, and then take the top one and set this one on dodge. So what this will do is just kind of push some of the effect out a little bit more, because with dodge, as I said, it's darker in the darker corners of the image, and these cracks are pretty dark. So if we have just the dodge layer, it's not always going to show up in the cracks the way that we want it to because of how dark it is. So if we have the screen layer on it at a low opacity underneath it, it really pushes that out, especially the main cracks here. We really want the effect to show up there. Okay, so we'll duplicate this layer, and that's going to really blow it out. Go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll just give it a blur of 5. I'm going to make that a little bit oranger. Oranger, that's a word apparently, oranger. That looks pretty good. And as I said, there are those light spots on the side of the image. But it's darker than the main lava, which is definitely good. Now, a few things to improve it, it would be to add a light from below the text, kind of a bevel effect to make it stand out and look like there's actually light shining on the bottom of the text. So we can go ahead and try that. Remember, I had a duplicate of the original text layer. We'll bring it to the top, and we'll duplicate this, and then below that we'll make a black layer and merge that together so it's one layer. Go to Filter, Reshow Gaussian Blur, and we'll give this a blur of, let's see, we'll try 10. 10 should work good. And then what we'll do is take the gradient tool and choosing a foreground to transparent gradient, make sure our foreground color is black. We just want to remove kind of the top half of this image. So starting from the top up here, we'll drag down, and before we get to the bottom of the text, we'll end it so right about there. Okay, once we have it looking like that, we can go to Filters, Recently Used Bump Map, and I already set up the settings the way that I wanted it. We're going to unclick the Compensate for Darkening button and make sure the Invert Bump Map isn't selected. The azimuth is going to be 270, the elevation will set around 8, and the depth is going to be around 16, because any higher than that, and then it starts to get kind of sharp. So we'll set that around 16 and hit OK. And we'll set the blend mode of this on to screen for now. Now we want to make sure that it's only affecting the text itself, not the background. So once again, we're going to right click on the extrusion layer, choose alpha to selection, go back to the layer, and then go to select invert, so that instead of having the text selected, we have the background selected, and then fill it with black and select none, so it's only affecting that. Then we can set this blend mode on dodge, and then we can colorize it. So colors, colorize, set this to kind of a yellow. So that looks pretty cool, just like that. A couple things that we still might adjust though, that you get, this is really cool. If we go back to our extrusion layer, remember the walls of it are gray. And gray is going to be affected by a colorize option. But the face of it, which is white, will not be affected. So if we go to colors, colorize, you can see, if I zoom in here, that it already changed it to kind of a blue. So we'll move the hue over to kind of red, bump up the saturation, and that's really red. So we kind of want to set this in between around like 23 or 24, and if we take the lightness and darken it a little bit, it also affects the face. It makes the face turn from white to a gray. So if we lower that just a little bit, say around like 20%, that is going to darken up the face as well and make it look a lot cooler. There's a couple things we can do to just overall make the image look cooler. So we're going to create a new black layer. Go to Filters, Noise, HSV Noise, and increase the value of that till you get a bunch of little dots. Hit OK. And then go to your curves and add a contrast curve so you have less stars, kind of like that. And then go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, give it a blur of 1, and then go back into your curves, give it a very high contrast curve just to kind of make them bigger. Again, repeat the Gaussian blur, bring it up. So the idea of this is just to have a bunch of little dots around the screen. Make sure you desaturate it too. So that looks really good. And then we're going to take a smudge tool, select a large soft brush, increase the size of this to something like this. Make sure you set the spacing to 0, and then the rate, turn that down to I think it was around 5. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of smudge in just directions like this. It doesn't really matter. Just select one direction, and don't select one direction because that's a terrible band. But smudge in different directions like this, and try to keep groups of them kind of smudged in the same direction, and then other groups smudge in the opposite direction. And we can go to colors, curves, bump that up a little bit, and take the red channel, bump that up, take the blue channel, bring that down. Okay, so there you can see the effect, and I might even just do this again. Just, as I said, just take little groups, smudge them in one direction, and set this blend mode on addition or on screen. And what this will do is it'll give you some cool spark effects, and very, very cool, like little embers and ash kind of floating off. Definitely a neat effect. And then create a new from visible. And on this, we can just go into our distorts and choose the ripple effect. And just set the amplitude down to something like 1. Increase the, let's see, is that the right effect? Yeah. Increase the period. This will make the waves bigger. And then lower the amplitude to like 1 or 2. And then run the filter again, only this time change the orientation to whatever the opposite is of what you had. Might even bring that in a little bit smaller. There we go. And this will just add a little bit of a warping effect, as if there is a heat distortion coming off the lava below it. And it's just little elements like that that really make this text effect pop. I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and be sure to check out theblendmode.com and also my Fiverr page, and I will see you guys next time.